Here we go. Good evening and happy Hanukkah. Tonight's shiur, as always, Lilu Nishma Levi Mori Do Bermer Ben Levi Imi Marati Rocha Bada Rav Michael. And tonight we have the privilege of talking about parshat MiKaitz, which is, by the way, just FYI, is generally read on Shabbos Hanukkah. There are a few exceptions, and it's rarely read when it's not Hanukkah. However, having said that, we will continue our story, of course, as the parsha does, of Yosef. The parsha, of course, begins with Yosef being called into Pharaoh's palace to interpret some dreams. Ultimately, he becomes in charge of food distribution in Egypt. And we're going to pick up the parsha there at the end of the first chapter, or the end of parsha Perek Mem Aleph, where Pharaoh is being given some advice, perhaps by Yosef. Others say that this is really part of the interpretation of the dream. And Pharaoh ends with V'yato Yera Pharaoh ish navon v'chacham. Yosef tells Pharaoh, you should appoint a wise and discerning individual, V'shiteo al Eretz Yisrael, and he should be put in charge of the land of Egypt. Yaseh Pharaoh should do v'yavkeit b'kidim al Eretz, and appoint officers throughout the land. And he should take a fifth of all of the crops that grow in Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. And they should collect all of the food that is available during these good years, that are now coming up, because he's just interpreted the dream saying there are going to be 7 good years followed by 7 years of famine. And v'yitzperu bar, and they should accumulate bar, meaning grain. Tachat yad Paro, which should be under Paro's supervision. Ochel be'arim, food in each of the cities, be'shamaro, and it should, of course, be kept under guard so that people don't start trying to steal it and utilize it and put it on the black market. This food that they're going to put away during the 7 years of plenty will be something put aside for the land, l'shevesh ne'arav, for the 7 years of famine, which will follow in the land of Egypt, so that the land should not be cut off. Pharaoh likes the idea of an ekol avadav. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit. The reason I've included this is I just want to show that we have a number of different ways of referring to what is being stored. Ochel, referring, of course, to the fact that the grain that is being stored will produce food. Bar being grain itself. And our two terms that are used here when Yosef is introducing this idea to Pharaoh. Now we go to the implementation. During the 7 years of plenty, it produced plenty, which is what was expected. And they collected and gathered all of the food, all the excess food of the 7 years that were in Egypt. Exactly as Yosef had said, they put food in each of the cities. The food that was collected from the crops that around the city, they placed within the city in granaries. In other words, all of the grain was stored within cities within the land of Egypt. Yosef accumulated grain, kechol hayom, like the sand of the sea. There was much grain that he accumulated until it was unable to continually count it because they ran out of numbers, I guess. They couldn't count that high. They ran out of fingers to count on. I don't know. But again, notice the same words appearing, ochel and bar. And the reason I'm highlighting that is because now we're going to see, as we switch into the story with the brothers, we're going to use a different term, and we're going to see that in a moment. It says, the 7 years of famine begin as Yosef had said, there was obviously famine in all the surrounding area. In all of Egypt, there was now bread. Why was there bread? Because they had grain to bake into bread. But again, notice now we've used the third term for what is being generated, what is being produced, the commodity that is being available. We've got ochel, we've got bar, and now we've got lechem. But all of Egypt became very hungry. They cried out to Pharaoh that he should provide food for them, bread for them. Pharaoh tells them to go to Yosef. Whatever he tells you to do, that's what you do. Now, the land, the famine spreads on the entire face of the earth. Vayiftach Yosef Yosef opens all that is in Egypt. Vayishbor limitzrayim. Now, Vayishbor, I'm going to leave untranslated. We're going to get to because that's going to be the key. That is this word Shin Beit Reish is going to be a key word as we go through the rest of this parsha. Now, that's what our focus tonight is on. What does this word Shin Beit Reish mean? And we're going to try to come into a number of different reasons why this word is used here for what is going to happen in Egypt. The famine becomes very great. And all of the surrounding areas eventually come to Egypt. Lishbor El Yosef. To Yosef, they come to provide whatever the service of Lishbor is. Okay, it's become, famine has grown throughout the land. Now, chapter 42. By the way, parshat MiKaitz, if you look in the Sefer Torah, there are no breaks. It is one long paragraph. The entire story is written as one paragraph. It's, I think, one of the two longest paragraphs in the Torah. The other one is Parshat Vayetze, where the entire parsha is paragraph. No paragraph breaks throughout the parsha. Okay. Vayar Yaakov. So, and I think the point, by the way, of that is that we shouldn't think that Yosef is disconnected. The story of Yosef is disconnected from the story of what's going to happen afterwards. All one story. Even though we've got two threads going through this story since last week's parsha, where the brothers, where Yosef moves to Egypt, and we have two threads. We have the Yosef thread and the Yehuda thread, and then we get back to the Yosef thread, and we've been in the Yosef thread. Now suddenly, in the middle of this chapter, we don't start a new chapter when we switch back to the brothers thread. It's the same story. That's what the Torah wants to emphasize by putting it all in one chapter. Vayar Yaakov. By the way, if I were to title this chapter of MiKaitz, if I were to give it a subtitle, the subtitle is God is bringing the Jews to Egypt to begin the what he has told Avram about the 400-year exile. That's the title of the chapter. But let's continue. Vayar Yaakov. Yaakov sees ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim, that there is something in Egypt. Again, as I said, I'm leaving this untranslated. Although I know I should translate at this point. Okay, Vayishbor or Shever refers to some type of transaction. We're going to leave it at that, some type of commercial transaction. But it also can mean the item being transacted, in this case, grain. So we're going to see two different meanings of that, and then we're going to talk about later on a third and different meaning for this word Shin Beit Reish. Okay, Vayomer Yaakov, the son of Yaakov, tells his son, Lama titra'u, why are you afraid? Why are you fearful? Why are you doing whatever you're doing? Vayomer, and he introduces again with another word. He says to them, Hinei shamati ki yesh shever mitzrayim. I have heard, not I have seen, but I have heard, even though it says Vayar Yaakov, he saw, I've heard that there is shever in Mitzrayim, there is some type of grain dealing going on in Egypt. Reduce shama, go down to there, v'shivru lanu misham, and transact for us from there, that we can live and not die. 10 brothers of Yosef go down to Egypt, lishbar bar b'Mitzrayim, to transact for, now here he uses the word bar for grain, which we've seen above, b'Mitzrayim, to buy grain or whatever the grain was from Egypt. However, at Binyamin Yosef, we know Binyamin doesn't sell. You're going to sell, something is going to happen to him. He's very worried about Binyamin being on the road in a non-safe environment. He doesn't want him to go. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael. Now it's interesting because in verse 3 they're referred to as Achei Yosef, Yosef's brothers. In verse 8 they're referred to as b'nei Yisrael. By the way, this is the first time throughout the Torah that we have this passage, this term b'nei Yisrael used. We are always referred to as b'nei Yisrael as a nation. That's our name. But this is the first time it's used, and it's referring to the 10 sons of Yaakov himself. Lishbor. So they come to, again, transact business in the midst of those who are coming. And why are they coming? Eretz Canaan, because the famine is in the land of Canaan. Now, verse 6 tells us, Yosef, hu hashalit al haaretz. He is the one who is in charge of the land. But then also, hu hamashpir l'chol haaretz. He is the one who is doing all of the transaction. Mashpir, as you know, nice, wonderful store. You come to purchase things over there. Used to be right on the corner of what's the name of the street there? Ben Yehuda and King George. Big store. I was called a mashpir because it was the supplier. Hamashpir is the supplied everything. So Mashpir here is he is the supplier l'chol amar to everybody. You wanted to buy grain in Egypt, you had to come to Yosef. By Yavoach Yosef, the brothers come. Again, they're called here the brothers of Yosef. They're not called Bnei Yisrael. They're called the brothers of Yosef. Okay, Yosef sees the brothers recognize. I think we all know the rest of the story, so I'm not going to go through the rest of it, but I wanted to focus really on the fact that we have this verb, this word, shin beit reish, this root is the theme word of the story. Lishbar ochel, they're coming. Okay, they come lishbar ochel. They repeat this over and over again. I think it appears 16 times in this short chapter. We have that word appearing. It's very much a theme word of the parsha. So I wanted to try to focus on what are the different meanings and why suddenly are we using this? Why aren't we using liknot to buy? If they're coming to buy, normally we use liknot, right? We have when Avram comes to buy from thing, we know the words. Why is it suddenly using this word? Which, by the way, we've never seen this word used before or after in the Torah in this kind of. There's one other place. There are two other places in Tanakh where shin bet reish is used in the context of a commercial transaction. There are two or three other places in the Navi where it's used as a commercial transaction. Every other time, the word shin bet reish means something completely different. Okay, now, generally, by the way, in modern Hebrew, shin bet reish, if you have grandchildren who do mathematics, you know that a shever is a fraction. Okay? Lishbar means to break something down. The first time we have shin bet reish in the Torah is in the story of Lot, where the people come by Yikshu Lishbar Hadelet. They came close. The mob is about to break down the door of what is it? Why is it Lishbar? To break it into fragments, right? Lishbar, you smash something into fragments. That's why a fraction in Hebrew is shever, to break something into small pieces. Okay? Now we're going to try to see why that word is used, and we're going to go through the parshanim, and again, we see it appearing throughout. Then later we get back to a little bit of ochel. But the key words here is shin bet reish and ochel. Okay. Now, by the way, Onkelos, and I rarely cite Targum, but this is one place where I felt Targum might help us because the word he uses for lishbar is, or what is the Harava Yalpane Kolas V'Tatsu Kolas Vayishbar LeMitzrayim. What does Vayishbar there mean? Vizavin. Now, you think, okay, that's nice. I don't know Aramaic. What does vizavin mean? But everybody knows the word vizavin from the Haggadah. The Zabin Abba betrays Zuze, right? Right? Zabin means somebody purchases something, right? Okay? So here, Onkelos is translating it as purchase, period. Lemizban, to purchase. Okay, let's go to Rashi. And by the way, the other Targumim use the same word, vizavin. Okay, Rashi says, very interesting, Vayishbar LeMitzrayim, shin beit reish, this root of shever is lashon mecher. It applies to meaning to sell, v'lashon kinyanu, and it also means to purchase, to acquire. So it has two different meanings. In other words, it's a perfect description of a financial transaction from both sides of the picture. It can be used to describe the seller. It can be used to describe the buyer. So he says here, Khan, in our pasuk of the first one, where he says, Vayishbar LeMitzrayim, Shamish Lashon Mecher. Yosef opens the storehouses and sells grain to the Egyptians. Ulahalon, later on, when Yaakov uses the word V'shivru lanu misham, he means Lashon Kinyon, purchase for us. He doesn't mean go sell some more grain there. They're not going to Egypt to sell grain. They're going to Egypt to buy grain. So again, we see that this root is used for both halves of the transactions. Now, Rashi goes one step further, lest you think that it's related to the word bar, which means grain. Al tomer eino ki im bitzvua. You might have thought that the word shever only refers to purchase and sale of grain because it has the word bar in it, grain. However, he says no. Sha'af b'yayin v'cholav matzino. In the pasuk, as I said, there were a couple of psukim in Tanakh where we use the same word. In Yeshaya, we're told Uluchu shivru below chesach v'lo mechir yayin v'cholav. You can also shivru. You can also transact and acquire yayin and chalav. So it also applies to. It seems to be all types of foodstuffs. Gershon. Well, Shev, nobody. But I'm saying, but the Navi just refers to yayin and chalav. That's all he refers to in that pasuk. So, but clearly, Rashi is implying that shever means the transaction, not the commodity being transacted. That's Rashi's point. Okay, that it refers to the transaction and it means anything. Now Rashbam goes a step further. He's following in Rashi's footsteps, but I think he's more clear than Rashi here. He says, Lashon kinyan machal umishteh. It's purchase of food and drink. In other words, it's not used for purchase of property. It's not used for purchase of furniture. It's used for purchase of food and drink. And he quotes the same exact verse that Rashi quoted. Quotes the same verse, which says that you can use shever for yain and chalav. But again, both of those are consumable food consumed or drinks, consumable drinks. Okay, then we get to Radak. Okay, now Vayishbar Mitzrayim, he's going to explain a little bit why does it say, firstly, why Vayishbar Mitzrayim? Why not Vayishbar? And he sells grain. So he says, firstly, Tchila, in the beginning, who are the purchasers? Machar lahem. He's only selling to the Egyptians because only the Egyptians are aware that there's food to be bought. Nobody else knows yet. Even though the famine is spread beyond the borders of Egypt, the news that there's grain available for purchase in Egypt hasn't spread yet. Until it becomes known throughout the region that there's grain for purchase in Egypt, and then Yosef sells to all comers. The lashon shever mibinyan hakal nofel al hamocher v'al hakohen. He says the lashon of shever is both the purchaser and the both the seller and the acquirer. Ki ba'ula bazeh. Now he says, why is it called shever? Al shem hatfu'ah shenikra shever. He says that the word shivru as a verb for purchasing grain is specifically related to the fact that it's to purchase grain. It's not to purchase other things. Why is grain called shever, is what he wants to know. Where do we get the idea that grain is something that breaks? Lefishi shoveret hara'av. Because grain breaks famine, breaks your hunger. When you are hungry and you got grain, you will be eventually, your hunger will get broken. You'll be satisfied. You'll be able to eat something. That's why he says grain is called shever, because it breaks ra'av, it breaks famine. Al derech yishbru pa'im samam, as is again in Tehillim, we're told that Hashem provides food for everybody. V'nei hamocher notein hashever, v'kona lukeach hashever. The seller sells the grain, and the purchaser purchases the grain. V'apula, and the sale is transacted al shneim, through the two of them working together. So hence the transaction of transacting relating to grain is called shever, after the grain itself. In reality, when it is a verb, it's only the seller, because he is the initiator of the transaction. So he's got nothing to sell, there's no transaction. So that's the majority usage is the seller is described as the verb. Okay. Now, Kiyesh shever b'Mitzrayim. There was a shever in Mitzrayim. Shever, he says, is lashon mechira, is the language of sale. So the verb shin bet reish refers to sale, even though, as I said, we've had it referred to breaking. Shenemar, and he brings another case, ochel tishbru me'itab. Food you shall purchase from them. And I think that's the only other case of this verb being used for food in the Torah, purchase or sale of food in the Torah. Now it's interesting that you should be careful. Why? When Yaakov speaks to the brothers, he does not say lo ochel, doesn't use the term food. Lo bar, he doesn't use the term bar for grain. Ela shever. Okay. Okay. Yaakov ki shever b'Mitzrayim. Hinei shamati ki shever b'Mitzrayim. Yaakov says twice he uses shever. Now, why in the case of Yaakov, why does Yaakov use the word shever to refer to grain? Ki lashon shever kolel hatfua vehabar. It includes grain and includes other things, other foodstuffs. The kolel gam kein hashod v'hashever. It also includes other meanings. L'chein yod hotzi ha'inyan kulo b'lashon shever. All of it he uses for whatever they can buy that will help them get through the famine. The Od Amar, and we see that he's using shever there to refer to what they are going to buy, not just the act of buying. The shivru lanu misham, purchase something for us there. The Lo Amru, he doesn't say to the brothers, the shivru lanu ochel misham, buy us food from there. So there he's already using the shivru to be in both the verb of the purchase and the commodity being purchased. So he's including not only, in other words, by using one word of shivru as opposed to tiknu, because if he say tiknu, he'd have to tell what they were buying. He'd say tiknu ochel. But by saying shivru, he's cutting down a word. He's saying shivru, buy grain for us. However, but he's also hiding inyan hagalut le'ati, that this going down to Egypt to buy grain is the beginning of this future exile. Umizer Ramas, and that's what he's hinting to. Amar redu shama, go down there. Below Amar lechlu, he doesn't say go there. He says redu, go down. Lefish and ishtabdu sham minyan redu. He's sort of prophesizing, even though he doesn't realize it, by saying that they're going to end up being in Egypt from this period of time. Once they get there, 210 years, which is the gematria of redu. The Amar v'shivru lanu misham, and you will supply us from there. Lirmos kira lahem, because he saw why shivru hashever, the breaking, the harsh things that are going to happen. The fact that Am Yisrael is going to be broken up. V'galut misham, he's already prophesizing the fact that the exile is coming. That's the shever, that there's going to be something is going to be broken. Am Yisrael is going to almost be broken by this galut. So he's already seeing that at the onset, Yaakov says, even though it's not a full prophecy, but he uses that language. Now, Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch gives us a very, very interesting explanation of the word shivru. My theory was Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch didn't write his original in Hebrew. I didn't know, I don't speak German. So no matter whatever way I'm doing it, I'm going to either be translating it into Hebrew or English. So since we're mostly English speakers, I brought down the English. I had to sit and type it out, but it's a lot easier than translating the Hebrew. So I'm going to read what Hirsch says according to the translation of the Hirsch. According to the fundamental meaning of the word shever, to break, as I said, like shuli shpor adelit, they approach, in the case of Lot, the mob is coming to break down the door. To split up. It seems to mean to retail, to buy or sell in small quantities, as opposed, of course, to a wholesaler who sells in bulk quantities. So the reason it uses the word shever is to break things down into smaller sizes to sell them, which is something that a retailer does. They buy in bulk, they break it up into smaller packages, and they resell it. Or a job or whatever, right, okay. He would only sell quantities required for the immediate requirements of each family. Only so could speculative buying and cornering be prevented. In other words, Yosef's idea of one focal point to sell is to make sure that he is selling to end users who are buying for their own use, not to sell on the speculation market. He does not want people buying and trading in grain. You want to buy for yourself to eat? That's fine. As the sages remark, people had to attend themselves. You had to come down. You couldn't send your household help. Nothing was sold to slaves. Otherwise, a man could send 50 slaves. And each person was only allowed to bring one beast of burden with him. So whatever you could buy was whatever one animal could carry. That was it. You know, Joseph was not selling you a year's worth of supply. He was selling you for immediate consumption, and then you had to come back and buy more. And everybody had to come to one address, and that is Yosef. He himself attends all the sales. In other words, he is the one who was the superintendent over all the sales. He did not depend on subordinate officials, but personally came into contact with the hungry householders who came to buy. So Yosef, when he's first telling Paro what to do, is he's setting this up so that there has to be a central repository for grain purchases. One person who's in charge, who is oversight over all of the grain purchases to ensure that everybody is getting only for their own consumption. Yeah. Yes.
Rather than one central location.
That's where he stored the grain. The grain, Gershon's question is, we read before about the fact that food was placed in each of the cities, but that's where the grain storage was. That isn't necessarily how the purchase happened. Okay, the purchases all had to go through Yosef. Okay, storage. I suspect, as you said, there was there were sales in different places. So on Monday, the sales were in city number 1 in the north. Tuesday, they were 20 miles away or whatever he traveled for the next day. So each day of the week, probably there was a sale in a different place for the people in that area, and the other storehouses were closed, so that you had to travel to, or I don't know, maybe they only had one. Maybe it was once a month they would empty out that storage. Don't know how he arranged it, but that's at least according to Psukim, that seems to be the way it was arranged, that you had to come to Yosef to buy grain. He himself tends to okay. And this is why it says in the following chapter, by Yosef hu shalit al haaretz. Even though Yosef is the ruler, he's the second in command to Pharaoh, still hu mashpir l'chol haaretz. He is the one doing the actual sale. He is the provisioner for everybody. Although he was the ruler, he himself is the retail seller. But these methods of his, so necessary and so wise in the circumstances, brought about all that followed. Only because he insisted on this rules, as it is imperative for everyone to come himself. Otherwise, Yaakov could have commissioned just one of the sons, or even a stranger, an agent, to do the business on behalf of them all. And only so did it come about that Yosef came into contact with all the brothers. The repeated remark, how dire the famine became, gives the motive for all of these precautions. The first says, Yosef is very much concerned with people buying and selling and trying to profit and corner the market. That's all of his strategy is focused on that one thing. Okay, we go to Abar Benel. Okay, miyad shenishlemu sheva shnei asava hitchilu sheva shnei ha'ra'av. The famine immediately began as soon as the 7 years of plenty were over. There was no there were no average normal years in between. Immediately after the 7 years of plenty, that the Nile overflowed the banks and provided plenty of crops for all of Egypt. Immediately after the end of the 7 years, the Nile didn't rise at all. Of course, Hashem did not provide any rain in Egypt because Egypt never has rain. And immediately the year after, everything shut down. There was no grain, no crops growing, no water, nothing. And the remaining 6 years of the famine, where there was no plowing, no grain, because there was nothing to grow. Says that's where the pasuk describes the 7 years coming. Only through the famine is the fact that Yosef's interpretation of the dream is correct, proven. I mean, the fact that Egypt had 7 years of plenty wouldn't have proved that that his interpretation was a good dream. Yeah, it may have just been coincidental. We had it was one of those cycles. But when the famine comes, and it comes strikingly and immediately without any hiatus in between, that proves the dream, that his interpretation was correct. We have to understand also that the famine doesn't just affect Egypt, it spreads to all the neighboring countries. Even though the plenty was only in Egypt, the famine spreads to all the lands around it. Even though the famine spread throughout the region, there was bread still available in Egypt from what the Egyptians had collected during the years of plenty. There was still food left over. And the result of everybody else who didn't know the famine was coming hadn't saved up grain. They hadn't had 7 years of plenty before that. They didn't know they were supposed to be saving up grain. They had regular ordinary years. When the famine hit them, they had nowhere to go but to go to Egypt. Originally, the Egyptians, to go back to Gershon's question, if each city had grain, originally each of the Egyptians individually, personally collected extra grain too. It's not that they just gave to Yosef. They each could have stored grain themselves, right? But the grain they stored themselves, what did they do? They sold on the market. They could get better prices selling it to the foreigners who were coming in to buy grain. They didn't think, oh, wait a minute, we got 7 years of this coming through. Maybe I should save some for myself. Hey, they saw instant cash. Let's go for it right away. Instant gratification. They also, even though Joseph said it was going to be 7 years, they weren't thinking, next year it was just a bad year this year. Next year it'll grow. So let's sell all this surplus that we've been collecting. Let's sell it, right? Make the money now. Okay, now I was going to come up. Because there were so many foreigners coming in caravans to buy all the bread that they could, all the food that they could get, all the Egyptian supply ran out. And that's why everybody ran out of food faster than they thought they would. Even though they hadn't yet fully run out of food, they already saw their supplies dwindling, so they start saying, hey, Paro, you better start selling food. We're running low already. Or they wanted Paro to announce that, wait a minute, stop selling. People were to make an edict that you couldn't export grain because people were selling their own grain and then they were going to rely on somebody else's. Any country, when you're in the middle of a famine, you don't go exporting food if you're in the middle of a famine. Paro sent them away. Yosef, go listen to what Yosef says. He is completely in charge of all supplies of grain in the land. He says you're allowed to sell to foreigners, sell to foreigners. He says you're not, don't. He doesn't tell us what Yosef's response was because Yosef didn't respond. Because Yosef said, fine. He wanted them to use up their supplies as fast as possible and to sell to everybody so that everybody else's grain would run out and everybody would have to come to him. And then when everybody has to come to him, I got the monopoly. Now I'll make some money for the king. Yosef's whole focus here is, hey, I collected all this grain. I don't want to keep it. I'm not going to eat it all. King isn't going to eat it all. I want to sell it, make and bring money into the king's coffers. However, the Gamli Yosef also has a plan in mind. How is he going to gain from this whole thing? Because now, the way he set it up, every purchaser has to come in front of him. Who's he waiting for? He's waiting for his brothers, just like it happened. Yosef had great, he was very successful. Because as people ran out of food, guess what happened? Food prices went up. Because all Egyptians had already sold theirs biyoker, and of course they raised the prices also because there was already a famine. To all the foreigners, and now once they had already set a higher price, well, it was easy for Yosef to keep the prices high and make sure he made lots of money. That's why it says in the Torah, it was all around the whole surrounding areas. We got Mitzrayim. And the Egyptians already run out of all of their surplus grain, individual surplus grain, to sell to the Goyim. And then when all the individual grain was gone, Patach Yosef et Otzrot HaMelech. Yosef opens now all the granaries of the king. Ubetchila, Ubiyishbar, and says he sold. He again arranged for sales. Originally, as he said, he sells to the Egyptians because they get there first. When it gets harder, we call our Ratzot Bolish from Yosef, and everybody from the surrounding area is now coming to buy from Yosef. There's a monopoly now. He's the only one who's got grain to sell. So again, what he's saying is that the two psukim, one where it says he sold only to Mitzrayim, the other where it says he sold to everybody, are describing two different stages of the famine. Stage one, where he's selling to the Egyptians. Stage two, where he's selling to everybody after everybody, including the Egyptians, have run out of food. Amnam. When it says Yaakov saw that there was shever in Mitzrayim, Ein inyano shahaya sham lechem. That's not, doesn't mean to be translated as he saw that there was bread available in Egypt. Ella, what he saw, shayusham mofrei tfuat hamelech. Okay, he saw that they were selling grain that belonged to the king. There was a grain market there. Kishever hu shem nemar al hatfuah hanimkeret. That the word shever does not just refer to grain; it refers to grain as a commodity being sold. Is what Ibn El says. Shenemar lishbor el Yosef. They came to transact business about grain with Yosef. By Yishbor Mitzrayim is again he sold to Egypt. Yomar Kishama Sheshama Yaakov. Yaakov is heard Ki Mitzrayim Patchu Otzot Hamelech. Vayumochrim Hachita Lechol Haolech Shama Lishbor. However, Yaakov heard that in order to buy grain, you individually had to come there to purchase it. That there is now a market, a commodities market for grain in Egypt. What does that mean to say? That they were selling grain to foreigners who were coming to purchase grain. The Amar Lebanav, and that's why he tells his sons, I've heard that there is grain market in Egypt. Lama titro, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Shiur Yaakov has understood that there was sale of grain available in Egypt. And he saw merchants going there, and they were purchasing grain there. Now remember, this was stage one, that he saw the merchants were not just purchasing from the king, they were purchasing from the commoners, so they were buying big supplies. His son said, we don't want to schlep down to Egypt. So they would be paying these middlemen who were schlepping up from Egypt, who were buying the grain from private individuals, not from Yosef, but they'd be paying a surcharge. They'd be paying pretty penny, because not only were they paying the inflated prices of Egypt, they were paying the inflated middleman's prices also for transporting it back to Canaan. The Amar Lahem, and that's why Yaakov tells them, Lama Tisro, it's enough. Don't make it look like, oh, we're so rich, we don't care how much we pay for grain. You're showing yourself off in front of everybody how rich you are. You don't really care how much of a surcharge you're paying. So it's $100 today, it'll be $500. We don't care how much it costs for a week. And you're very, we're too important to go schlep down to Egypt. Don't make believe that you're so well off and so honored that you can't even go to make sure there's food for your family. Al tasukein. Don't do that. Reduce shama, go down. Don't buy from these middlemen who are charging you extra. And if people don't think we're so rich that we now have to schlep down to Egypt ourselves, therefore we'll be able to survive. When it's a famine, you don't stand on ceremony. You got to do what you got to do to feed your family and to make sure that people don't say, oh, he's so rich, we don't have to care about them. That's a Barbanel's perspective. Okay. Al-Shich. Al-Shich quotes the basis of this on the Midrash, Amar Vayar. Firstly, it says, interestingly enough, it uses two different phrases. When the pasuk describes Yaakov, it says Vayar Yaakov. Yaakov saw that there was shever in Egypt, but then he says to his sons, Hine Shamati, I've heard. So is it Vayar or is it Shamati? So Al-Shich says the following. Amar Vayar, the reason it uses the word Vayar, since the sale of Yosef, it's been 22 years, Yaakov has had no nevuah, his level of prophecy has gone out the window. He can't receive prophecy from God because he's basically in mourning over Joseph all these 22 years. However, it was not held back from him a small inkling of prophecy. Like he saw something, but he wasn't sure what it was he saw. He couldn't really figure out what it was he saw in prophecy. Obeder Chalom, or perhaps he saw it in a dream-like vision. He saw that there was something left in Egypt. Now, interestingly enough, I think what Alshich is trying to say is quoting the Midrash. The Midrash says that Yaakov has this inkling that there is some way, there is some hope to be gained by going to Egypt, not just to get grain. Yaakov somehow sees some glimmer of hope that there's something belonging in Egypt. I think if we go back to the original word of shever, meaning something was broken, I think Yaakov realizes that something is indeed broken. It's been broken for 22 years. He has had a broken family because Yosef is missing. And the fact that he sees this little glimpse that perhaps the only way to repair this break is to go down to Egypt, because he's got to recover the broken piece in Egypt. So he sees the shever in Egypt. I think one of the ways we can look at this, he sees that there's a shever, there's a broken off piece of his family in Egypt. He doesn't understand that because he thinks Yosef is dead. He's been mourning for him for 22 years. But Nevuah, we never understand at the time we have the prophecy. Nevuah is all, unless you're Moshe Rabbeinu, okay? Even the prophet himself doesn't always know what he's seeing. Whether it's Yirmiyahu, we're talking about 70 years, whether it's Avram Avinu in 400 years. Prophecy is generally something that is fluctuating. It's
murky.
Murky. No, it's not murky. It's not really, not murky is a negative word. It's not murky. It's flexible. It's something that is left open to multiple interpretations. And it's up to us to figure out, or we have to sometimes go through it to figure out which is the interpretation that's going to be the one that gets selected. So oftentimes prophecy is fluid, I'll call it. It's not concrete. It's a lot less than, okay, okay, here's what's exactly going to happen to a T. You rarely have nevuah like that. I think the closest we come to that is in Daniel, where he's describing Rome and Greece and what's going to happen during Bayit Sheni. But in general, prophecy is much more fluid than that. Okay. So I think that Al-Shich, by bringing the Medrash, is starting to allude to that. And I think the word shever, which, as I said, is a theme word throughout this whole perek, is alluding to the fact that there's something missing. There's something broken. That's why it uses shin beit reish, which means to break. That something is broken in Yaakov's family, and it's only through this whole story that it's going to get fixed again. I think that's one of the things about shever. And I think, by the way, I'll finish. Let's just go here, okay? Okay. Vayayakov ki shever b'Mitzrayim razal darshu. The Medrash says shever v'gam savar al shem be'efshar ki ra shever hagalut b'Mitzrayim. He saw the fact that Am Yisrael was going to be almost broken by the galut of Mitzrayim. It was going to be a great break by Am Yisrael. V'ra hamakot. He also saw prophetically. Again, not understanding what he was seeing, but he saw the plagues of the Tzach Hadash B'Chav. Interestingly enough, the acronym of the plagues, the Tzach Hadash B'Chav, B'Gematria Shever. Okay? The Gematria of the Tzach Hadash B'Chav, and I checked it out, is 501. Gematria of Shever is 502. We know that Ima Kolel, anytime you're off by one in Gematria, that's equal, that's close, good enough. V'rosh Shakol Makot Haya Sar Shel Mitzrayim Kayam Shaloma Kiminhag. But not doing this, by the way, is the Chidah. Says that he saw that during the whole period of the plagues, the angel of Egypt survives all of this. Shelo Kiminhag, which is not the norm. Normally, the Bechila Nevetz Hasar Shaluma. When Hashem punishes a nation, first thing he does is he punishes their Malach and Shemayim, and then he punishes the nation. But in the case of Egypt, it didn't happen that way. Why? Because Sar Mitzrayim only is Nevad by Yam. So he saw already the outline of the Geula, the Odasar Kayam, that even though the Sar of Egypt was going to survive, the redemption was going to begin and take place. Razal Darshu, and how do we know that the Sar of Mitzrayim was still alive? He named Mitzrayim Nosei Acharayim Zesh Al Sar Mitzrayim. They saw the angel of Egypt was still chasing them. Okay. V'gam Savra Geula B'Mitzrayim Lifnei That's what the Shemay stands for. Okay. The Shmot Rav, according to Shmot. So he also was all of these things. Yaakov is saying all of that's going to happen. It's going to follow his sons going to Egypt. There's going to be a galut. There's going to be a geulah. And how is that going to happen? The redemption is going to happen. The zechut avotav. The only way Am Yisrael is going to be redeemed is because of the zechut of the avot. Because how do we know that? Again, if you add up the lives of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov together, Avram lives to 175, Yitzchak to 180, Yaakov to 147. You add those three numbers up, you get 502. Gematria Shever. Same number as the Gematria of Shever. V'geula, and the redemption that will follow this Shever is Bavurim Shel HaAvot, is only in the merit of the Avot, Asher Avdu Hashem, who served Hashem for 502 years. Okay, and that's, I'm going to leave the rest of this out. Okay, and by the way, and he also claims Afura Galut Edom Yishmael, also Gematria Shever. If you add up Edom and Yishmael, you also get to 502. So he saw both of those Galut Ugeula Altzad Emash Asher Ramazalevu Gematria Shever Im HaKolel. So again, all of these things come out to the Gematria of 501 or 502, and Yaakov is using and alluding to the fact that the Egyptian exile is the beginning of Jewish history, really, as a nation. And that nation is going to go through not only that exile, but two other major exiles. And ultimately, Hashem will redeem us. Now, I think that one of the key things that I said at the beginning about parshat MiKaitz is it's virtually always read on Shabbos Chanukah. On one, by the way, when there are two Shabbat Chanukas, it's the second one. But the reason I think is, again, to remind us that when we look at Hanukkah and we look at Hashem's redeeming us, one of the challenges of redemption, one of the challenges of Am Yisrael always is the concept of Shever. Are we split into pieces or not? When Am Yisrael splits itself up and fights against itself, then Hashem has no way of protecting us completely. It's only when we are united in the service of Hashem that we can have a Yeshua like we had time of Hanukkah. Although time of Hanukkah, if we look at time of Hanukkah, we find the Jewish people were not completely united. There was a group that was serving Hashem. There was a group that was leaving Hashem. And yet, Hashem was able to perform miracles for the group that was dedicated to serving Hashem. So we have to understand that, yes, Achdut of Am Yisrael is important. That's why I think we use this word Shever to show what happens when Am Yisrael is broken. But at the same time, we have to be united in the service of Hashem. When we're able to do that, we will ultimately reach the final point of history where we will witness the miracles of the final redemption of Yameinu. Thank you all.
Amen.
Questions, comments, feedback at this point in time? Anybody?
The word Shever is fascinating if you think about it as a broken piece.
Yes.
Yaakov was sending his sons, excluding Binyamin, to look for the broken piece.
Yes.
Which was maybe Yosef.
Well, that's again, I said, that's what the Medrash alludes to, the fact that Yaakov sees something prophetically, that there's something missing that somehow ended up in Egypt. And I think that's the concept of the Shever, that there's something that broke off from Yaakov, a piece is broken, and he's going to, to fix that break. And that's, I think, the result of the story, is ultimately at the end, the brothers do sort of reconcile, and we get to Am Yisrael. Again, unfortunately, as we go through Jewish history, that reunification doesn't always stay unified, and that's why we have problems in Jewish history. Okay? Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, have a Chanukah Sameach, everyone. And next week, FYI, next week, shiur will probably be Tuesday night. I will send out an email to let you know. It will either be Tuesday night or it will be on. I will have to record it, and it will be available on recorded version only. Because Wednesday night I'm going to be preoccupied. So and every other night I think. But Tuesday night's the only possibility. If nothing comes up on the schedule, Best Friend will do it Tuesday night. If not, it will be a recorded shiur only. Thank you all. Have a good night and a